A very good evening from India, a very good morning to US, and good afternoon to other members joining from different parts of the world. A very happy Earth Day to all of you as well. So we are here to welcome you again on behalf of the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, Bangalore, and in collaboration with the Hixon Center for Urban Sustainability at the Yale School of the Environment. I'm delighted to announce the fourth webinar of the Cities in Action. And this invites expert conversations for urban solution series. We bring together experts to identify innovative urban forestry strategies. I am Shalini Dhyani. I'm principal scientist with Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in one of the constituent laboratories, National Environmental Engineering Research Institute in India. And I welcome you all. And in this edition of this Urban Sustainability Expert Conversations, I welcome two speakers with me. We have Manan Bhan, who is lead sustainability scientist with the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, known as ATREE. And we also have Joan Keener, who is deputy director at the Trust for Public Lands, New York City Playgrounds Program. A very warm welcome to both of you. And the topic, as you know, for the today is urban forest, especially understanding expert conversations for urban forestry solution. We know that urban areas are expanding exponentially across the world, and urban forests are very vital as cities expand rapidly. These urban forests offer essential environmental, social, and also economic benefits. They help us combat climate change by absorbing carbon dioxide and also reducing urban heat islands through shade and moisture release. Urban trees in urban areas improve air quality, reduce stormwater runoff, and also support biodiversity by providing wildlife habitat. But beyond these ecological benefits, there is a lot more that these green spaces are providing us. They are enhancing mental health benefits, encouraging a lot of physical activity, and also fostering community well being. But as these concrete landscapes are growing, preserving and expanding these urban green spaces and urban forests is very, very crucial for creating livable, resilient, and sustainable cities. In this session, with our two experts, we're going to explore innovative strategies for supporting urban forest, focusing on the benefits to climate vulnerable population, such as children, elderly, migrants, or also low income residents. Our experts are going to share insights drawn from their years of experience as researchers and practitioners on how we can advance greener cities across India, United States, and also largely across the world. With this very brief setting the background of this discussion, I would like to very briefly introduce both of these speakers and experts. So Joan is the Deputy Director of Trust for Public Lands, New York City Playgrounds Program. She is a native New Yorker with a background in community organizing and gardening. Joan left a career in journalism to join Trust for Public Land in its mission to connect children to urban green spaces. Now, this is very encouraging. And over the past 17 years, she has supervised participatory designs, community engagement, and also post-opening activation of 120 green schoolyards across the 5 boroughs, helping to manage an ongoing partnership with the Department of Environmental Protection and Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice to build climate resilient playgrounds. She has been overseeing the site selection, budgeting, and also community engagements at 56 green infrastructure sites, designed to capture on an average of 1 million gallons of stormwater annually each. She has a BA in dance and political philosophy from Sarah Lawrence College. I welcome you, John, for this webinar. And with this, we also have our second speaker from India, Manan Bhan, who is joining from India. Manan is currently a fellow in residence at Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, a global leader among environmental think tanks. Manan leads a public-facing action research focusing on sustainable land use and climate research, both inside and outside the cities. In Bengaluru, he is leading efforts to develop hyperlocal toolkits to combat heat stress. I welcome you both to this webinar. And with this, I would like that both of you can share a brief presentation so that we can set the stage for the forthcoming moderated discussion. So I would request Joan to please go ahead and make her brief presentation.
I'm going to talk a little bit about our New York City Playgrounds program, which has been part of our work at the Trust for Public Land to connect people to nature since the late 1990s. We know that heat is an increasingly dangerous problem in our world. In the US, it's now the #1 weather-related killer, and it has tremendous impacts on public health, especially children. It affects physiology, behavior, and social interactions, increases learning, and increases disciplinary issues. It's often urban heat islands exacerbate the threat and are often most extreme in low-income communities. So we want to emphasize those as we choose places to work. Our program got started in the late 1990s as a way of addressing creating more green spaces in New York City. There are over 1,000 schools, and many of them look like those blacktops you see on the left there. No greenery, no trees, nothing. But there are already sites that cannot be used for anything else. So they're an empty spot where we could have we added greenery. We began by working with students, centering them at the start of design. We also, all the sites are full-scale renovations that now capture stormwater. They range in size from 1/4 acre to 2 acres. So the number of trees we can plant varies greatly. We plant as many as we can to shade the sports structures and the sitting areas of students in the schools. We also plant bioswales with trees and understory trees to create shade around sitting areas. One of the important things that we've learned in planting trees is that the size matters when you plant a tree. The smaller trees do not grow as fast and provide as much shade, so you need to start with trees that are at least 3.5 to 4 inches in caliber, and those also stand up better to the wear and tear of having 1,000 students run around the schoolyard. We also did research on how to best measure the effectiveness of trees and shade in schoolyards. Our climate lab partnered with the Hixon Center at UCLA and found out that air temperature is not an effective measure of heat burden necessarily. Instead, thermal radiation, direct sunlight, reflected sunlight, and heat emanating from hot surfaces like walls and the ground and play equipment contribute much more to the heat burden people experience on very hot days. The aggregate of those measurements is called MRT, and we found that green trees, like larger trees, can actually reduce the temperature from a sunny spot to a shady spot as much as 36 degrees. We also use our analysis from UCL to track what would happen after many years of trees growing and showing the reduction in temperature in this map from before planting and then after planting. You can see the shading areas there and the reduction in heat. Some of the co-benefits of trees in schoolyards, of course, are creating beauty, creating areas where kids and community members can sit and gather and enjoy nature. They're wildlife habitats, and they're, of course, they clean the air as well as cool the air. And they're also places that enhance a sense of connection to nature, which has amazing mental health benefits that have been proven in many studies, reducing stress, reducing violence even in cities, they found. So they just make a more beautiful play space. We've also found that some of the challenges have been maintenance during drought periods, such as we had in New York in September. It can take 3 hours to water 35 trees, and that's a lot of time for custodial engineering to spend. So we have been gathering student teams of middle schoolers who like these kinds of jobs to help with the watering when there are drought periods. Trees need to be pruned, of course, and we have some of the things we do are train students and custodial engineers how to do the pruning so they can come back and do them, but not every school has the capacity for that. So we find ourselves, we have raised money to hire another stewardship person so they can come and help us take care of the green spaces and especially the trees. I also wanted to mention that as the heat has been increasing, trees have been the #1 priority for schools or school students and community members in terms of what they want to put in their schoolyard. And that did not used to be the case. The #1 thing used to be play equipment, but now the #1 thing is trees, which is kind of a cool thing. Some best practices we have been using is using our GIS mapping tools to map heat islands and identify where intervention is most needed and most effective. We use this kind of measurement in helping us to target where we want to build or renovate playgrounds and renovate schoolyards. We also have a deep environmental education component in our participatory design, where students learn about the benefits of trees and green spaces, how they capture stormwater, how they clean the air, all the things that they can do, and that helps them want to plant them around their sports fields, their sports areas, and in their outdoor classrooms. I think I mentioned the tree stewardship that we engage in. We also try to get communities involved in that and help them form green teams who will do some kind of seasonal management of trees, composting and adding mulch. And it's especially important to build for funding when you're creating a program to plant trees anywhere. In New York City, there's a wonderful organization called Trees New York, which was founded, I think, before the Million Trees Initiative under Mayor Bloomberg in 2007. And they taught many, many citizens how to prune trees, how to care for trees. They had a citizen tree pruner course that we've all taken and many New Yorkers have taken, and encouraged neighbors to adopt trees. We do the same thing in our schoolyards. Just some resources to share with you that the TPL Climate Lab has created. We have annual updates on the actual temperature and hotspots all over unfortunately, these are just US based resources right now. We're just a national organization. And then there's also a heat severity index that can rate your community from 1 to 5. And I think that's the end of my presentation for now. Thanks all for being here and listening, and I return it to you.
Thank you, Joan. I think that very well states the concerns that are rising. And heat is in urban areas is not only limited to US. I think globally it has emerged as one of the biggest challenge. Summers are approaching in India, and I think we all have been experiencing these urban heats and urban heat islands right from March onwards. So I think it's a very, very crucial point that you have highlighted in your presentation. And at the same time, the work that you are doing, I think it very much talks about mainstreaming nature-based solutions at a very, very local level to address the societal challenge. So what I really appreciate about your work is where you are using these GIS-based and analytical work on identifying the heat islands and cooling islands and how you are integrating these trees into it. You also have well highlighted the challenges. I think it's very insightful for all the audience here in this webinar to understand the concerns of Global North, how these kinds of concerns are more or less similar to what India and other Global South countries are facing. With this, I think I'll now invite Manan to share his brief presentation for this webinar and give us more insights about what is happening in Global North South. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shalini. I hope you can hear me. Hearing is not a problem. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for having me here. So I'm actually trained as a social ecologist, and I've been working for the past few years on global sustainability issues around carbon accounting, around land use change, around the impacts of consumption across borders, and like research questions of those kind. My exposure to research on urban forestry, urban heat has been relatively new over the last couple of years. But over this time, I have sort of been able to borrow two of the concepts from my other work into my urban heat and urban forestry work as well, which I'll explain. But over the last 2 years, we've basically tried to work on 3 particular buckets of work. One of them is really to understand how does a neighborhood feel heat and what are the systems existing at a neighborhood scale and in the context of an Indian city, a ward scale, which is the smallest administrative unit in an Indian city, how does a ward or how does a neighborhood really feel heat in the sense of how do systems around water, energy, mobility, and health, etc., how do they really interact to either increase vulnerability for the communities who live and work in these neighborhoods or decrease vulnerability for them? And we've had some really fascinating insights around those, and I'm happy to share that later. We have also then gone on to work with migrant communities, especially youth from migrant communities coming into the city of Bangalore, really trying to work with them through the use of games and innovative tools to really help them understand how they can respond very, very effectively, again, at a neighborhood scale to the kind of disasters that a city like Bangalore can potentially face. So that's also something that we've done rather successfully and showcased our games to different platforms, different communities across the city a bunch of times. And the third sort of bucket of work that we did was actually play the role of a facilitator. And here we got together a lot of very, very different people, including people from the IIHS, who are activists, who are researchers, who are practitioners, who are even decision makers at some levels or the other, really get them talking as to what are the really urgent challenges that communities across the country in India are really facing, and what can we do in the short term as well as in the long term to combat those. And again, urban forestry, urban greening is part of the conversations that have also been a part of these kind of communities. Now, the concepts that we have borrowed from the sort of larger work that I've done around global land use change are two. And one of them is the fact that we really need to expand our outlook in the sense of what really are we trying to talk about here? What are we really trying to achieve here? And here, sometimes I feel that just talking about urban forests is sometimes might be a bit reductive. I think we need to talk about urban green spaces, because it's really, really important to make that distinction that actually ecologically and environmentally, it's actually not very, very useful to go towards forestry-based solutions, because the local ecosystem context may or may not support that. So in that sense, sort of expanding our outlook to focus on urban green spaces, and that could involve trees, but doesn't have to, is a distinction that we really, really have to really make. The second thing that is actually really interesting, again, borrowing from some of my past work, is to really understand the difference between land cover and land use. Now, when we talk about urban forestry or urban green space, like there's lots of research and knowledge existing around the land cover aspect of it, in the sense of we know that urban green spaces work through shade, work through transpirational cooling. We know that they are important not only in that quality, but also in that quantity. And that kind of configuration around an urban area is very, very important. It's actually not enough to have them concentrated at a specific part of the city and deprive other areas of those green spaces as well. So here is where the sort of land cover issues really come into focus. What we can't ignore is that there are land use implications of the land cover as well. And here, what I'm really wanting to stress about is issues around access and issues around justice. Now, who you are in a typical global south city, I'm not very well aware of like context in the global north. In a typical global south city, who you are and what you do really determines your exposure to heat and your proximity to a green space. And this has been proven time and again by different people across the world. Our plans around increasing green spaces actually do not really consider these social hierarchies. And that is something that is really, really important again to consider. And this is something that should be part of our discussion. And the third thing is that this kind of lack of recognition breeds something that now researchers call as thermal injustice. Now, it's again not really enough to focus on the land cover and forestry solution, but also to really understand access. Now, the sad part here is also that restoration plans around increasing green spaces have not really, it would be incorrect for me to say that they have actually tried to solve some of these land use challenges. They may have been, according to me, they are disproportionately focused on solving the land cover challenge while not really focusing on the land use challenge. And that is something to really think about for all of us here in this.
Thank you, Manan. I think this very much brings the context of also environmental justice and also demand supply gap of two urban green spaces. And I think this is one of the major concerns that most of the urban cities in global south are facing, because disparity to access is also one of the biggest challenge. When World Health Organization says that every individual in urban area should have at least 9 meters square per capita of green space. While we see in India, it is by far very less, far very low. I mean, right from 2 meters square to zero point 0.1. I have heard all these instances where this disparity is really increasing. And if you talk about migrants and marginalized people, they have this is the last thing to be thought about for them. So I think this urban green space disparity is one of the important contexts to be discussed when we talk about global south. With this, I think you both have set the stage for the moderated discussion. And while Joan has clearly highlighted the risk, and I think both the risks for global north and global south are not different, they're very same. You talk about urban heat islands or increasing temperature in urban areas. You talk about the flash floods or depleting groundwater. This is something that's very crucial in urban areas. And while somebody asked about the tipping point, I think we are standing at the tipping point at the moment in the global south, and this is going to be further deteriorated and be more challenging in future. So without further delay, I think you all both have highlighted the challenges, and you also have highlighted the demand supply gap, and you have stressed that there is increasing disparity to access. I would like to first go to John and ask about the context that you presented. What role actually you think urban forestry or urban green spaces can play in broadly addressing climate resilience in these urban areas? And at the same time, I would also like to understand the kind of planning that we have in the present might or might not be sufficient for future with the demographic changes happening and the kind of land use land cover changes happening in the country. It will be really not sufficient. So how do you see this entire context, and what kind of transformative changes you think will be required that will be more meaningful to be integrated, not only for the US context, but also for Indian or any other Asian city that you think will be relevant based on your, I think, years of experience? You have some great insights to share. Over to you, Joan.
Thank you, Shalini. So there's sort of a difference in context between working in schoolyards in New York City, because we're not adding additional park space per se. There's already the space there and we're greening it. So, but in terms of the United States, I know that right now, 175,000 acres per year apparently are getting paved over. So we're not going in the right direction. We need to be incorporating, as there's paving, requirements, code requirements, municipal requirements, state requirements, and incentives for developers to have to provide green space, a sufficient green space to take care of the heat burden, the floods, everything that's going to be happening in the future increasingly as part of the codes. So what we're finding in our research around the country is that 100% of municipalities have talk about climate resilience in their plans and in their goals, but only about 3% of them have codes and requirements, municipal requirements of the developers to actually enact these greening plans. So to actually plant or create green spaces or create parks or create other open areas as part of their development. So we have a long way to go. One of the things our organization is doing is partnering with an organization, I think they're called City, I can't remember the name of it, but they're sort of giving incentives to cities to plan for greening much better. They're giving them awards, they're giving them funding. So there's a sort of a competition among cities to do this work better. They're trying to, and then that's a nonprofit. So that's a role a nonprofit can play. We also play a role in advocating for greening with the federal government. Right now, we're not in a good position around this, but in the past, we've had great successes in creating bond measures around the country that provide for increased park space, increased green space, and particularly having a lens on equity in where you put those spaces. So we have research that shows the areas, particularly in America, redlined areas, which were typically not getting trees planted, typically lower income or Black and brown areas that are the worst places that people suffer urban heat island, and targeting your intervention in those areas. So those are also some of the ways that our climate program and our 10-minute walk program are encouraging the largest cities in the US to address these problems with a lens towards like Manan said, thermal injustice or thermal, I'm not sure what thermal injustice, and really trying to correct that, because those are the people who are suffering the most in this scenario. As we know, the global south is suffering much more than the global north. Everything we do has to address that. And yeah, so we have a long way to go, but there are, I mean, I can share some resources at the end. Some reports our organization has done on the state of greening in the United States and what things are working, what things are not working. In New York City, you know, the one thing we did, I guess, is when our program started, we were the first place to put trees in schoolyards. The School Construction Authority or the Department of Education never put trees. They only put play equipment. So as a nonprofit, we were able to push sort of the design into a green space. And we also provided the specs for the trees and told them how to do it. You know, what size you need, how you know, all the stuff you need, what size the pit needs to be, what type of soil, etc. So that's one way that nonprofits can kind of push the envelope forward in better practices.
Thank you, Joan. I think this really gives me some good understanding, and to audience also, how this entire approach can be pushed further. But at the same time, I think municipal corporation and city administrators and also urban planners need to understand the relevance of integrating green spaces as the primary requirement for cities. Unless that kind of sense of understanding comes, it will be really, really tough to have more resilient and sustainable cities of future. While I go back to Manan, Manan, as you know, that in India, especially old cities and tier 1 cities that we call as metro cities, including Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, and all, are really, really very dense at many places, and they're highly concretized, where there is very less opportunities at the same time for integrating and having nature-based solutions because of the shortage of the space. As Joan mentioned, that if there is a requirement, if there is some heat island, they can have some kind of playgrounds or parks and have green spaces. But that's not true for India. You cannot have green spaces, parks, I mean, where you desire to have. At the same time, if you see that we are exponentially expanding, no more horizontally, but also vertically, we are having more vertical development happening in urban areas, both in peri-urban and also in urban areas. In that case, how do you access the challenges and opportunities for nature-based solution? And what do you think, based on your brief understanding and your thoughts on when you talk about thermal injustice, how do you think that NBS mainstreaming can be a more practical model for mainstreaming nature-based solution in urban areas, especially in fast-growing cities of India, South Asia, or largely Asia?
Yeah, this is actually really interesting because it again sort of brings into a land cover element and a land use element. So I will again sort of use that frame to sort of answer this question. And I'll try to do that with the case of Bangalore, which is a context that I sort of know the most at this point of time. There's been a few, I mean, from what I've read, and I haven't seen an example of it at any sort of a scale, but in the sense of that there are, even as, I mean, you're right, cities are growing not only horizontally, but also vertically. There have been some interventions proposed that could sort of solve for urban heat island challenges, even when cities are growing vertically. And these challenges, I mean, these solutions are both, let's say, at the site level, they're at the building level, they're at the community level, for example, and all of them are trying to basically make what some researchers call an urban breathable fabric. Basically, we need a neighborhood fabric which facilitates cooling, and nature-based solutions becomes a part of that cooling, because anyway, urban greening, nature-based solutions are just a component of larger sort of planning that we really need to relook at in the case of cities in the global south. So when you talk about let's say, site level or community level interventions, they could be anything like spraying, they could be vertical greening, there could be rooftop gardening, and there are some interventions in the city of Bangalore that I know who are trying to experiment with those approaches, and they've met with varying degrees of success. Because you'd be surprised that, I mean, we'll all be surprised, and I was surprised when I first heard that, the kind of really minute problems that come into being when you're trying to experiment with these solutions. I mean, they could be anything from, when if there's a rooftop garden, the presence of snakes, for example, and that becomes a bit of a danger. So these are issues that one might not, at the outset of advocating for these solutions, one might not be thinking about them. But when you actually go to the community and test them out, these are the kind of very minute level, very practice oriented, implementation oriented challenges that do exist. So this is something that we still need to solve at scale for NBS to be really successful. Now comes the land use part, and this is where it gets really interesting. One is the problem of space, and I mean, our cities are cramped and growing by the day. So the further development of parks and green spaces is a very, very real challenge. Also because we don't economically value them enough. I mean, we economically value other sorts of what we would call as development. So obviously, parks sort of lose out on those sort of things. Even in the city of Bangalore, or I would imagine for many global south cities, even if parks exist, they might not be in the best condition for them to be serving the kind of functions that urban green spaces and parks should. In many cases, they serve as de facto dumping grounds. They're in a bad shape. All of these issues do exist, and these are real issues again, because I've seen them from my own eyes. So it's a thing there. Again, talking about thermal injustice, a lot of the functional parks in many of our cities are actually closed off to the people who need them the most at the most vulnerable times of the day. So many parks in my city, for example, are actually closed when heat exposure is the highest. So who are, like, in terms of heat exposure, are these parks or green spaces actually serving the function that they are intended to serve? That is also a question that currently has no answer. And this is something I feel very, very deeply about. So I'm sort of sharing with you a very personal experience that I see every day in my city. So these are challenges that still remain in terms of existing green spaces, but also in terms of developing more NBS-based solutions.
Yeah, I think, Manan, I totally resonate with what you mentioned. And this is also the case not only with Bangalore, but many other cities where public access gardens and playgrounds that usually are needed more in our summer times or during day times are closed. Even for research, they cannot be opened. So this is one of the very, very crucial concerns. And also highlighting that how these congested, dense spaces really need to think, and especially the municipal corporation, to think very proactively how this can be made more resilient with the ongoing development that is happening. I think with this, while we talk a lot about challenges, and Joan brings in a lot of experience on, and I am always like a very optimistic person when I know that these things are very, very tough, because it really brings in a kind of shift in thought process, and this thought process and behavioral change has to come right from policymaker to the person at a local level, because even people in urban areas think that planting trees is a responsibility of government. And they think because in many areas, tree plantation brings a lot of mosquito breeding as well. So they don't want the trees around them. So they think that trees are one kind of a disservice for them in monsoon time. So there are multiple questions and multiple psychological aspects to be addressed when we talk about mainstreaming nature-based solutions. But I'll still build on this hope and positivity and optimism to understand on what can be and what are the successful interventions that Joan, you have been implementing or participating in that are replicable, that are having replicable potential. And what in all these 17, 18 years of your work with the communities you have learned from your projects? What are the main key enablers or key constraining conditions that support or they constrain the project to be implemented at local level, especially with reference to urban green spaces?
Sure. So, yeah, one of the main enablers for us has been other agencies who want to support resilience building. So urban planning that incorporates resilience. One of the agencies that has helped pay for our work, including planting trees, is the Department of Environmental Protection, which is the water agency in New York City. This is true in several other cities, major cities in the United States also, because floods have been so bad here. And I mean, these playgrounds are not going to stop floods per se, but they do help eliminate something called combined sewage overflows, which you probably have heard of that. But in these older cities, the sewer is combined with the street drainage. When it rains really hard, that's just dumped right into the ocean. So if you can find partners in government that have the same goals as you and get their support, that can really help. So that helped us also have an argument to plant more trees. You know, we had money for them. We could also innovate on how to plant trees that got more water, even though we're using pervious pavement. We've also put in something called silva cells underneath. We've used things and tested what can we do to make the trees grow faster, to have less die off, to thrive better. And some of those innovations have been possible because we've had funding from our partners who are interested in water capture. Another thing that has really helped a lot is having the students involved in taking care of trees, having parents come during tree care sessions, having neighbors come. We had a school in Brooklyn where the students were advocating for a schoolyard, with us, and it took a couple of years to get the funding to do it. But meantime, they decided they were going to get street trees planted around their school because there wasn't enough shade on their sidewalk. So they started thinking about how can we improve our schoolyard and our neighborhood, rather our schoolyard, and it branched out into how can we improve our neighborhood and add more trees. Now we have a parks department where you can actually petition them to plant trees. And luckily for us, so because of our weather, trees do not create more mosquitoes for us where we are. I don't know whether there's tree species that don't attract that, you know. So like for our schoolyards, one thing that we found also is that our custodians who help care for the yards do not like to clean up tree litter. So they don't like when there's big seeds. So there's certain plants that we won't plant because they're too much of a stewardship burden for the custodians. And that has helped them feel like we're thinking about them and we're thinking about the burden that they have in watering and keeping these trees thriving during the many decades that they're going to be in the schoolyard. I'm just trying to think of enabling factors. I mean, it does really help to have government, a leader, a mayor. So under Bloomberg in 2007, he created a sustainability plan for the city, envisioning how there would be 1 million more residents in New York City by the year 2030. And in part of that was expanding schoolyards. So he partnered with us to make another 290 schoolyards across the city. He also partnered with the Department of Parks to plant 1 million trees across the city. So, you know, that's the problem with that is that goes up and down with who's in leadership, right? I'm just trying to think of other learnings. You know, I think students are the best advocates and teachers about nature to their parents also. So having young people involved seems to really make a difference. we've had parents come in and say, we didn't understand about the stormwater problems. We didn't understand that a schoolyard could help with this. So, and I think also it helps train the next generation of environmental stewards. Students, people in the future are not going to care about nature in cities unless they're connected to it, unless it means something to them, unless they have an experience digging in the ground or seeing a plant grow or seeing the difference of sitting under a tree or sitting in the hot sun. So that we think is a very good investment in the future.
Thank you, Joan. I think you very well highlighted some of the key enablers that started from political will, going down to the incentives, developing intergenerational partnerships called conservation and restoration. I think these can be very important, three fundamental pillars of scaling up and also scaling out some of the efforts. Time is running short, and I'm sure audience are liking this discussion and exchange of ideas. I have one question to Manan, and then we move to the audience Q&A. So Manan, I would like, based on your understanding, how can cities in India effectively engage local residents, including school communities? I think they are very, very fundamental units of ensuring that conservation is transferred to the next generation, and also they are one of the important keys in tree planting, conservation, and also maintenance of urban green spaces in India.
So actually some state governments, and I sort of recently got to know even the state government in the city where I live, has actually a program for encouraging school children to plant some trees. And this sometimes often becomes like an exercise where there are claims made about, okay, record number of trees planted, this, that. So at least on paper and at least to some extent, there are initiatives that are trying to work with school children, college goers in terms of encouraging them to plant trees, adopt them, and things of that sort. The way, in my head, again, sort of drawing back to what I said before, the way to really engage or get communities to also feel ownership about them is, I mean, first of all, to increase their access. If they can't access it, there wouldn't be a lot of community buy-in to the kind of solutions that you might want to propose. So again, access, and I keep saying this again and again, so I'm sorry for repeating myself, but like that is the fundamental point in terms of working with communities. The other is to then involve them in the planning and the implementation and the maintenance process. It's not only enough to plant those trees, and I think Joan said it really well. I mean, it takes a lot of time and care to actually get them to a level where they are giving you the kind of heat mitigation services that you might want to expect from them. So if you expect buy-in, or if you want buy-in, then you need to involve these communities right from the very start and not in a later stage, in that sense. The other thing which is also really important is, I mean, ultimately, urban forestry, urban greening, whatever we might call them, involves dealing with land. And land is a very political, it's a political entity. So you need to, again, sort of work very closely with them, work very closely with the communities that are around you to really get that sort of ownership that you might need. This is sometimes, I mean, at least in some areas in the city of Bangalore, for example, is a bit of a problem because there are a lot of migrant communities that have come into the city over the last couple of decades. And their sense of ownership or sense of pride may not be as high as it might have been or it could be. And this is where, again, initiatives around sort of increasing that sense of ownership, increasing that sense of pride, which may or may not be focused from an urban greening aspect, is actually really, really important. And then you could transfer that to the kind of issue that you want to focus on ultimately. So I think that is also something very important. We tried doing that with the sort of games that we played. Like one of our games was actually trying to focus on what are the kind of services that you might need in a neighborhood. What are the kind of infrastructure that you might need in a neighborhood for you to call your neighborhood a sustainable neighborhood? And this is a game that we devised sort of broadly on the lines of Monopoly to really help these kids understand, okay, what are the kind of services that can exist, and then they sort of work with each other to really get those services and sort of say that, we are part of a sustainable neighborhood. So these kind of activities then you could make them issue specific as well. It could be urban greening tomorrow, could be health day after. and stuff like that.
Thank you, Manan. And with this, despite I see a lot of interest with this discussion, I will not now like to move to audience. And if you can see, there are a lot of questions even by audience. I've selected few of the questions for you both. So so regarding integrating urban green spaces or urban forestry into land use planning, uh, the questions are very relevant, and I would request both of you to be really brief because we have a lot of questions. So 1 or 2 minutes will be more than enough to answer these questions. The first question is for Manan. The question says, how can highly priced land in urban context be sourced for setting up urban forest? How can urban forestry be integrated into urban planning? With cities rapidly expanding, how can urban forestry continue to be a priority? And this is a major challenge. So what do you think about it?
Can you just repeat the question? I was trying to look at the chat myself.
Yeah.
Shalini, can you repeat the question, please?
So this question is about how can highly priced land in urban context be sourced for setting up urban forest? I mean, this is a very crucial question for Indian context. And how can urban forestry be integrated into urban planning? With cities expanding very rapidly, how can urban forestry continue to be a priority?
Okay,
I
so
hope
I thanks for whoever asked that question. Actually, I don't have an answer for the first part of your question. And having spoken to some of the authorities in this city, in the city of Bangalore, space comes out as a bit of a problem. It's very well easy to say we should be planting more trees, we should do urban greening. Actually, the authorities are sort of saying that we actually don't have enough land on the ground to do the kind of intervention that we would even like to do. And they have sort of plans or sort of, I would say, plans to increase the tree cover by X amount, increase sort of green cover by Y amount. The land remains a problem, which is where I think interventions around about sort of rooftop gardening, etc., like these kind of vertical solutions, I think we'll be seeing that more and more in a city like Bangalore. Also because in terms of innovation, I feel like when it comes to Indian cities specifically, I feel like a lot of these solutions might be first, we might be seeing them in the Bangalore context, and then they might percolate to other cities. So I feel like looking at also like horizontally sort of increasing how difficult that might be, I understand. But I mean, apart from the horizontal aspect, the vertical aspect would have to be looked into. How
Yeah.
it might be incorporated, just briefly, is that I don't see from the action plans, like disaster action plans, heat action plans that I've read, I don't see a lot of these sort of NPS issues really tackled as they are. I mean, there is sort of a passing tangential mention, and I think mainstreaming them in these kind of disaster-based action plans would be a very important way to get them into the kind of conversation that we are having here. They exist in master plans at the city level, and we all sort of know that master plans have not worked out the way that they should have. But now that we're looking forward into sort of the disaster resilience sort of a perspective, getting NPS in, I think would be a useful way to get them the focus that they need.
Yeah. Thank you. I have another question, and this question is for Joan. And this question is about, this question is by one of the students in Indian Institute of Technology. And she asked that, what is the concern regarding concretization? Because in India, this is another question. I'll get back to the previous question again. What are the best practices according to you and initiative for maintaining urban forests? Can you share some incentive models for community participation in urban forestry programs?
You know, I'm not really knowledgeable about urban forests beyond the schoolyards in New York City in terms of incentives. For our students, we help them form green teams. We give them stewardship grants and stewardship workshops on how to take care of trees. We work with the gardening staff and the principal to ensure that they understand that trees require maintenance at the beginning, and we also come back twice a year to make sure that those trees are doing okay. So that is our sort of nonprofit, investment, because we realize that these things can't take care of themselves, and schools are often burdened, and the places that we put do these schoolyard interventions often don't have the sufficient community kind of groupings or support to help maintain the trees. I know that there are, like I said, this organization citywide called Trees New York, which trains citizen pruners. There are incentives in terms of they can get grants to start tree care groups for the trees in their neighborhoods. They win, there's something called a citizens committee that gives these groups prizes. They can be judged the most beautiful group of trees by the plantings that they're doing in the tree beds and things like that. But they're not incentives.
Yeah.
Those tend to work in richer neighborhoods, to be honest. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that question.
Yeah. There is another question, and this question I think is for Manan, and this question is regarding the breathable fabric that you indicated during your one of the discussion points. Do you think breaking the concrete is possible? And it's been done in New York City pavements, but concrete is considered to be more sacred, and soil is seen as very villageish in India. So what do you think how this can be addressed?
It's actually really hard. I mean, whoever asked that question is actually really hard, because right now we are in the paradigm of build. Let's just build as fast as we can, with or without due consideration for the architecture of it and for the environment of it. That is something that is really hard, because the kind of needs that we have in urban areas, but also the kind of wants that we have. So I wouldn't subtract. I mean, needs is one, and I mean, needs is essential in terms of the kind of requirements that we have, but also our wants are also some. I mean, for some section of us in India, the wants are also become like sort of increasing at a rate that is not super, I would say, not super relevant to the kind of challenges that we face, and that remains a problem. So and from a need perspective, there is, I mean, from the neighborhood like that we were working in, there is an element of security around having concrete, to be very honest, especially for low income housing, low income settlements, which is still a bit, and you're right to say that it's like other alternatives seem a bit villageish. And I think that's a great way of putting that. There is a sense of security that cement and concrete offers that right now other solutions may or may not be offering. So there is also a paradigm change, a behavior change, before which we can talk about the fact that we replace concrete.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and especially when in the new world we are also talking about permeable pavements and all those stuff, fly ash being used in. So there's another dimension to add to this entire challenge, and also solution that is thought to be as a solution for Indian context. There is another comment as well as a question by Manish, and Manish thanks Joan for the insightful presentation. He really liked the children's engagement in your presentation, and he's curious to ask that are budget constraints a key reason why schools opt for paved areas rather than green spaces? Also, how are these school open space maintained? Are they managed by the school itself, or they are further supported by any NGO or external partner?
Yeah, great question. So the first question, why isn't there more green space, and is that a budget constraint? The real constraint is the use of the space by thousands of students. And to maintain like a grass field, it would become compacted in a matter of months with many, many children running on it. And if it was a rainstorm, it would turn into a mud pit. So we use artificial turf fields with gravel underlays also to capture stormwater. We use the trees around the edges of the sports fields. The reason there isn't just gardens is because it's an athletic facility also. It's a recreational space. So the kids need to have a space to play basketball, to play volleyball, to run track, etc. So there is a sports element that inhibits it becoming just more of a green space. but we also do put the green spaces up sort of along the quiet edges. So we make passive areas with the green spaces. It's not that it's more expensive. In fact, asphalt and painting is more expensive than greening. In terms of short term, in terms of long term, you could say the expense of maintaining it over, 30 years, maybe that it starts to add up. And how are they maintained? Yes, we actually advocated for a special fund for the custodial staff in schools when we started our program with the mayor. And we said, we will be your partner, but you have to realize that you need to invest in maintenance. So the custodians that are housed in each school help with the maintenance of the yards. They clean, do basic repairs. They're supposed to be watering the trees and the green spaces. They do not always. So we have to come in and help them. But mostly they are doing that, and that helps a lot.
Thank you, Joan. I think we are towards the end of this interesting webinar. We had many questions, but I'll request the organizers to collect these questions, maybe pass on to the two experts that we have. And we had great insights on developing interactive spaces in urban green spaces, so that they're not only used by people, but also address thermal injustice concerns in Global South as well as Global North. I thank you both, Joan and Manan, and also the collaborative effort by IIHS and Hixon Center of Sustainability for this very interesting webinar. I'm sure even the YouTube upload after this, when it will be launched very soon, will be very interesting for the audience who are not present today. With this, I thank you all. A very good evening to all of you, and goodbye to everyone. Thank you.